Welcome to this NEH pre-recorded webinar on the Collaborative Research Program. I'm Judy Adkins. I'm a program officer in the Division of Research at NEH, and I serve as the team leader for the Collaborative Program. Joining me today are two colleagues who work directly with the program as well, Program Officer Madison Hendren and Program Analyst Amy Trotter. During this presentation, we'll share essential information about the program and what it supports, and highlight what's new this year. We'll also share advice for putting together a competitive application and some tips to help you avoid common pitfalls. Just a reminder that all the details about the program are in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, which is available on the Collaborative Research Program page under Application Instructions. Also, we'll be holding a live Q&A session to field any questions you have on Thursday, September 5th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. There is a link to sign up for that Q&A on the Collaborative Research Program page. Just Google NEH Collaborative Research and you will get to that page. If you have questions after viewing this webinar and you can't make the Q&A, you can always email us. The relevant email addresses are on the final slide of this presentation. NEH has funded hundreds of collaborative research projects over the years. You can look them up on the NEH website, which is www.neh.gov. From that homepage, you can click on the Grants tab at the top, and you'll see a Search All Past Awards option. If you click on that, you can search by grant program as well as institution, date range, etc. This is an excellent way to get a first impression of the kinds of projects we've funded through this program. However, a word of caution, the program has changed quite a bit over the years. So you'll see included certain categories of research that are now separated out into their own programs. For example, archaeological and ethnographic fieldwork, or scholarly editions and translations. You will also see in that database of past awards some bundled research agendas that are quite different from the discrete project types we now support. To see the projects that we have funded since we initiated our current 4-category program structure, you should filter for awards from 2021 and later. So take a look at those past awards just to get a sense of the kinds of things we've supported, but always remember that the current Notice of Funding Opportunity is the blueprint to follow. For those not very familiar with NEH, we are an agency of the federal government, and we carry out our grant making through 6 divisions: Public Programs, Preservation and Access, Office of Digital Humanities, Education, Challenge Grants, and Research. Each division oversees grant programs that support different kinds of work or serve different goals. This is important to keep in mind because it has a bearing on the purpose of the Collaborative Research Program, which is housed in the Division of Research Programs. Our division oversees about 11 different grant programs split into 2 families. One family of programs is designed for individual scholars. These are programs like NEH Fellowships or NEH Summer Stipends. The other suite of programs, like Collaborative Research, largely support teams of researchers and are institutional grants. This means that if you are the lead scholar who is the project director of a collaborative research project, it is your affiliated institution that is the official applicant and would be the official holder of the grant. But the main thing to bear in mind is that collaborative research grants are intended to support research and fresh interpretive scholarship, not education or public programming, as valuable as those goals are. Here is the big picture overview of the Collaborative Research Program. The program supports teams of scholars working to advance humanities knowledge through research that leads to interpretive products. It includes 4 funding categories, which support projects of different types or at different stages of development. Those 4 categories are planning international collaboration, convenings, manuscript preparation, and scholarly digital projects. The different categories each have different award ceilings and performance periods. We will dig into each category and those specifics more deeply in a moment. You can propose interdisciplinary work or research in a single field. You can include on your team researchers from the natural or social sciences, as long as the project is firmly rooted in the humanities and employs humanistic methods. Partnerships among different institutions or different types of institutions are also welcome. It's also perfectly acceptable to have collaborations within a single institution. The rationale behind the 4 categories is to support the kinds of collaborative work that we see humanities scholars doing in the world. We are also trying to hit a certain programmatic sweet spot that allows for flexibility in terms of the kinds of projects people can propose, but also encourages well-defined, well-conceptualized projects with concrete outcomes. This year's application deadline is November 20th, 2024. And I want to highlight that November 20th is the Wednesday that is a full week before the Thanksgiving holiday. So this year's deadline falls earlier in the calendar than it has in recent years' competitions, just a bit earlier. So please take note of that. And the earliest start date for awarded projects from this cycle would be October the 1st, 2025. Before we dig into the details for collaborative research, we want to preview 2 significant changes in the NOFO this year, especially for those of you who applied last year and are planning to revise and resubmit. We want to make sure you're aware of these 2 changes. First, the mandatory page limit for the narrative attachment has been decreased from 11 pages to 10 pages. So to reiterate, your narrative cannot be longer than 10 pages, or if it is, your application would be considered ineligible. So please be aware of that. The second change is only relevant to teams requesting the extra $50,000 that is allowable in the manuscript preparation and digital projects categories for collaborations involving community colleges or certain categories of minority serving institutions. We have added a stipulation that the qualifying institution must receive at least the amount of extra funding requested. If this is a little bit confusing, don't worry, we'll discuss this more later in the webinar. Right now, this is just a heads up for viewers who might be familiar with the collaborative program and therefore maybe not intending to watch this webinar through to the end. We just do want you folks to know about this change. Now moving back to the collaborative research program generally. As I mentioned, these are institutional grants. The institution, not the individual project director, is the applicant and the grant holder. So it's important to understand what kinds of institutions are eligible to apply. Here is that list. 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofits, higher ed institutions, state and local governmental agencies, and federally recognized Native American tribal governments. Multiple institutions or scholars at multiple institutions can collaborate. So in that case, you would have an applicant institution that is the home institution of your project director. And then if you have collaborating scholars at other U.S. institutions of higher ed, for example, those institutions could be sub-awardees on the grant. You can even have a non-U.S. institution collaborating with you, but no money can go to a non-U.S. institution. We'll say more about collaborations involving non-U.S. scholars in a bit, as it's something a lot of people have questions about. What kinds of activities and products do collaborative research grants fund? The program supports the work that most humanities scholars do, such as travel to archives or important research sites, time to meet, conduct research, discuss, and write in order to produce books, digital projects, or other products that will have an impact on the scholarship in their field or fields, and possibly beyond academia as well. All projects, regardless of project category, must pursue clearly articulated research questions, must involve original research and interpretation, and must make an argument or arguments and contribute something new to scholarly or broader discussions. Ultimately, all projects need to be aimed at the creation of a sustainable interpretive product. The list here on the right suggests the range of collaboratively produced products that we typically see, mostly co-authored or edited or co-edited books, special issues of journals, digital publications, or interpretive websites or other digital resources. It's equally important to be mindful of what the program does not fund. We don't want anyone wasting precious time and effort applying for projects that NEH cannot support and that might well be ruled ineligible. On this slide is a long list of funding restrictions for the collaborative research program. I'm not going to go through it item by item, But just a heads up that the list is in the notice of funding opportunity for the program, but kind of late in that document. I believe it starts on page 35. So I encourage you to look at it very carefully early on as you're deciding whether to apply, and then consult it again sort of as you work on your application. Some activities or kinds of work are on this list because they are funded by NEH, but in a different program. So that's the case with documentaries, apps, exhibitions, scholarly editions and scholarly translations, digitization projects, and some other kinds of work. Other activities are on this list because they are endeavors that NEH never funds. That's the case with the creation of art, for example, or the support of specific public policies or legislation. So read the list carefully and reach out to us with your questions if you're not sure whether what you're proposing runs into one of these prohibitions. Now let's dig into the details of the 4 funding categories, starting with the Planning International Collaboration category. This is our smallest grant offering in the program, and it's intended for early stage projects. The goal is to encourage international collaborations and lend them some extra early support, given the added complexities sometimes of developing these projects. To apply, your collaboration must include at least one non-US scholar. So that's a scholar based at an institution outside the US, or it could be an independent scholar living abroad. However, scholars at US institutions must also contribute significantly to the project. Examples of funded activities include research time to correspond and exchange ideas through video conferencing, joint travel of collaborators to a relevant site, archive, library, or collection to do research and investigate a project's feasibility, exploratory workshops or working group meetings for collaborators, and completing a written research and future publication plan. Primary products for these awards include a written plan for subsequent collaborative research activities and future publication or digital projects, live streamed or recorded video of workshops, web posted papers, podcasts, blogs, etc. Keep in mind that these kinds of primary products might be the immediate outcome of the planning grant, but you'd still need to be aiming down the road for a larger collaborative publication or digital project of some sort that would be eligible for support in the program. So the aim of these plannings is to kind of support the early stage of the kinds of publications or digital projects that we support in the larger categories. So you cannot request a planning grant to plan work on a product that we would not support in the program. For example, a documentary film or a scholarly translation. You can request a maximum of $25,000, and the performance period for this category can be anywhere from 6 to 12 months. For these planning grants, there is no need to prorate the amount you request by month. So if you have, say, $25K worth of eligible expenses, you can ask for the full $25,000, whether you're doing a 6-month project or a 12-month project. We've decided in this year's webinar to highlight for each project category a few key things that competitive applications in that category tend to do well. So for the planning grants, the most competitive applications tend to have compelling and specific research questions. So even though these grants are for early stage projects and you aren't likely to have your arguments worked out or sort of done all your research, to be competitive applications in this category, you still need to present research questions that are more focused and specific than just a general issue or topic, and that, if answered, would be intervening in existing scholarship in a significant way. Second, you also need to be planning something downstream. This might seem self-evident, but we do see some applications that are for kind of an incremental continuation of ongoing research by established teams, or that seem to end with the conclusion of the grant and don't articulate what they are planning to do or hoping to do downstream. Those applications don't tend to do so well. Third, an application in this category is often more compelling to reviewers if you're trying to expand or deepen the collaboration itself, either by inviting new collaborators into the project or maybe you've all met before or know each other very tangentially, but have not had the opportunity to work collaboratively and seriously on a particular set of questions. Finally, at the bottom of the slide, there is just a reminder of what not to do, which is do not ask for a planning grant for the purposes of writing another grant application. You may, as part of a planning grants activity, complete a written plan for future research or next steps for the project. And that plan might include brainstorming about future funding possibilities. That's fine, but the work of the planning grant should not be to write another grant application. Moving along now to the convening category. The convening category supports a single scholarly conference, symposium, or seminar, or up to 2 working group meetings. The working group option gives scholars who need to do focused work with a small group of people, maybe on a collection of sources or at a particular site, the option of that smaller format. The aim of convening grants is to gather participants to further develop an already established collaborative research topic or project and plan subsequent publications or digital projects. So here again, there needs to be a larger, tangible, collaborative product that you're working towards. A conference or symposium must be open to members of an intellectual community broader than the invited attendees. It must be advertised appropriately, and it must be free of charge. It should include a variety of scholars bringing different points of view. Small working group meetings can be for the collaborators alone, but you need to explain why that's necessary for the work. Typical funding requests include compensation for the organizing scholars, travel, per diem, and accommodation for conference presenters or working group participants, honoraria, and costs related to venue rental or audiovisual services. Primary products for these awards include live streamed or recorded video of the convening itself, web posted papers, podcasts, blogs, etc., and preparation of papers or other content for subsequent edited volumes or peer-reviewed articles or special journal issues. You can request a performance period anywhere between and including 6 and 12 months, and the maximum amount you can request is $50K. No prorating is necessary. Again, just like the planning category, here too, there's no need to prorate the requested amount per month. So if you have sufficient necessary expenses, you could ask for the full $50,000 for a 6-month project or for a 12-month project or any length in between. This slide highlights a few key things that competitive applications in the convening category tend to do well. Again, these grants are meant to support a single event. It's okay to have virtual meetings, perhaps to plan the meeting and to plan the event rather, and to kind of follow up after it to continue to maintain momentum and build on the work of that main event. Competitive applications tend to have some named scholars who have committed to attend, in principle, at least. If you name no particular scholars and say you're going to issue a call for papers and just see who you get, it can be difficult for panelists to have confidence in the intellectual heft of the project. A call for papers is generally welcome in that it indicates plans to widen the circle and bring in new voices and perspectives. That's great. But competitive applications typically have some known committed scholars or participants already in place. And I should say known to the planners, not necessarily, prominent. They don't have to be, famous. If you present a wish list of famous scholars, none of whom have even been contacted, let alone said yes, that doesn't generally sit well with peer review panelists. So that is something to just be aware of. Competitive applications describe the event well. So what will you be doing each day, and what will you be doing each part of the day? Are there going to be session presentations followed by discussions? And what will the topics be? Or roundtable discussions about certain issues or certain readings, or focused work on some set of texts or artifacts? How is that structure encouraging collaboration or advancing the ultimate aims of the project? There are 2 places where the details of the proposed event can be described in the application. One is in the narrative attachment, and one is in the additional materials attachment, where you can provide a draft program for the event. I encourage you to take advantage of both of these opportunities to describe what's going to happen at that convening. Finally, competitive applications in this category have an interpretive research product as the clear downstream goal and driving force of the project. As the note at the bottom of this slide kind of suggests or reiterates, the convening should be aimed at advancing scholarship and not primarily serve, say, the purposes of education, public programming, community building, or dissemination of a completed project. Those are all valuable goals in and of themselves, but they are not well aligned with this particular grant program's purpose. Moving on now to the manuscript preparation category. This category supports completion of collaborative manuscripts in preparation for print publication. Examples include or multi-authored monographs or edited volumes, a series of peer-reviewed articles, and themed issues of peer-reviewed journals. Typical funding requests include compensation for research and writing time, travel for collaborators to a relevant site, archive, library, or collection to conduct research, and compensation for consultants. Submission to a publisher is expected by the end of the performance period. These grants are considered completion grants, but that completion can include a combination of research and writing. These projects have a performance period of 1 to 3 years. You may request up to $100K per year for each of the first 2 years and no more than $250K total for 3 years. An extra $50K beyond that $250K can be requested by certain categories of applicant institutions and by applicants who have a subawarded partner institution that falls into those categories. We're going to focus on the details of this extra funding in a separate slide or two in just a moment. So for now, just be aware that you might be eligible for as much as $300,000 for a 3-year project. Prorating, this is important in the manuscript preparation category. The amount you can request must be prorated by month based on your performance period. So as an example, if you asked for a 1.5 year period of performance, that is 18 months, you could ask for a maximum of $150,000. That's $100,000 for the first year and a prorated half of that for the final 6 months of your performance period. Here again, we are just highlighting some commonalities of applications that tend to do well in this particular category. So they tend to include collaborators that bring valuable and complementary skills, knowledge, perspectives, or disciplinary backgrounds, and that bring the right expertise for that particular project. This is really true across all of the categories, I have to say. Competitive applications in this category tend to be for pretty well-developed and advanced projects. Again, these manuscript prep grants are considered completion grants. Submission to a publisher is expected by the end of the grant period. You're not required to have a contract at the time you submit your application, but competitive applications at least discuss which publishers would be appropriate. If you're in conversation with a particular publisher or you happen to have a contract, you would definitely want to mention that. Competitive applications clearly describe the structure and arguments of the book and provide a detailed chapter summary. And that detailed chapter summary should kind of show how the argument is going to play out throughout the book as well, the arguments. Competitive applications also make a strong case for significance, and that often means making the case for significance both for both the immediate fields closest to the project and the humanities more broadly. Quite specialized projects can find success in this category, but it helps if you can describe your project in a way that will help peer reviewers outside your area of specialty appreciate the project's contributions and see its connections to broader humanities conversations. Next, make sure it's clear who is doing the work, who is writing which chapters, or who is co-writing chapters, or who is editing, who is doing what research, and so on. Finally, at the bottom, there are a few reminders about pitfalls to avoid in this category specifically. The performance period you request should end with submission of the manuscript to a press, to a publisher. You should not extend that period while you await readers' reports. We recognize that there are publication-related tasks that come after you submit a manuscript, but the goal of the program is to support the most intensive period of collaborative research, thinking, and writing. So the program does not support post-submission tasks, or at least costs for post-submission tasks, like the creation of the index or the reading and finalizing of page proof. The program also doesn't support publication costs or subventions to publishers, travel aimed at dissemination, or the holding of events. So that would be no book launch events or anything of that sort. Also, do not bundle into your application work on a digital product. So no work on a digital companion to your book should be part of this application. You may mention that you plan to do that sort of extension of the book down the line if you wish. There's a sort of history of the project section in the narrative that is where it's appropriate to kind of say what you've done to this point and what you will be doing going forward. But work on a digital companion should not be part of a manuscript preparation application. The Scholarly Digital Projects category supports the preparation of born digital scholarly publications, websites, or resources. All projects must be conceived and executed to address one or more significant research questions. They must make a robust interpretive contribution. They must involve original research, and they must serve the intellectual community beyond the collaborator group alone. These proposals typically involve scholars collaborating with digital humanities specialists, librarians, archivists, perhaps web designers. They typically use pre-existing platforms, programs, or other technological infrastructure. So tech innovation is not expected or necessary for these projects. It's fine to use tried and true DH methods, though you should be aware of best practices. Applications in this category must present a sustainability plan and discuss options for peer review. Typical funding requests include compensation for time to conduct research, write and build the digital project, travel for collaborators to a relevant site, archive, library, or collection to conduct research, and compensation for consultants. Possible products include born digital publications, content-rich websites that offer interpretation or argumentation, open access databases with significant interpretive content, GIS mapping projects that draw conclusions or advance arguments. There are several other NEH programs that support digital projects. So it's important to make sure that you're applying to the program that best fits your endeavor. To that end, please do also take a look at the programs overseen by the NEH Office of Digital Humanities and the NEH Division of Public Programs. Scholarly Digital Projects Awards have a performance period of 1 to 3 years. You can request up to $100K per year for each of the first 2 years and $50K for the third year. So the max you can request for a 3-year period is $250K. Here again, these awards are prorated by month, must be prorated by month. So as an example, again, if you ask for a 1.5-year period of performance, that is 18 months, you could ask for a maximum of $150K. In this category, like manuscript prep, an additional $50K can be requested by certain categories of applicant institutions and by applicants who have a subawarded partner institution that falls into those categories. We are going to clarify the details of this extra funding in just a moment here. And here again, we've tried to highlight a few common traits of competitive applications in this category. First, they're driven by well-articulated and specific research questions. Second, they describe their interpretive contribution or the arguments being made in some detail and in relation to existing literature. Some digital applications seem primarily aimed at assembling data or presenting a curated collection of primary sources, and they will say almost as an afterthought, and will have interpretive content. That kind of sort of hand wave at interpretation is typically not sufficient for a competitive application. Similarly, competitive applications in this category that involve mapping clearly explain what they're mapping and why, what questions that mapping will answer, what the payoff of that mapping will be. Projects that just kind of assume it's obvious why mapping is worth doing in a given context or with a given data set don't typically do really well. So you do have to explain the rationale and the payoff for mapping things. Next bullet item, describe the planned applications that do well in this category. Describe the planned final product well. Digital projects, of course, vary in how they're structured, how they look, how they function, and what they offer. They're much more variable than books. So for the peer review panelists to understand and appreciate what you're doing, you need to describe the product clearly. And because you're going to have a range of panelists, some who require or prefer verbal description, and some who are perhaps highly visual people and more comfortable with visual representations, you should take advantage of the sort of complementary but slightly different two opportunities that the application gives you to describe the structure, contents, and functionality of that digital project. So one opportunity is, again, in the narrative attachment, and the other is in the additional materials attachment, which invites you to provide a schematic representation, sitemap, wireframe, or screenshots. So just take advantage of both of those opportunities to describe what the end result of this research project will be. As with manuscript preparation, Scholarly Digital Projects applications should be for well-developed advanced projects. These two are considered completion grants, even though we recognize that completion looks a bit different for a digital project, but there should be something significant and major that is going to be complete by the end of the grant period. In addition, competitive applications in this category present a convincing sustainability plan that indicates which institution is going to sustain the project after you complete it. You're not required to have such an institutional commitment, but panelists often don't have a lot of confidence when a project director says he or she or they are personally going to ensure that it lives on. Institutional commitment generally tends to carry a little more weight and build confidence. Finally, at the bottom there is a reminder that Scholarly Digital Projects applications should not request support for work on print publications or for an event, including a launch event for the digital project. Also, just a note that digital projects that are companions to published books tend to not be highly competitive. That's because the primary intellectual contribution, the new argument or intervention, is typically already made in the book. There are some exceptions here, but you'd have to be proposing a digital project that is truly contributing something major intellectually beyond what the completed book has already accomplished. A digital extension that is aimed at, say, just sharing additional primary sources or conveying the book's arguments to a broader audience or sharing curricular materials is typically not a strong contender. Finally, I want to share a few details about this additional $50K beyond the standard award limits that some collaborative projects can request. This additional funding is only available for our two big grant categories, manuscript preparation and scholarly digital projects. And it's only available to certain categories of applicant institutions and to collaborative teams that include those categories of applicant institutions. Your institution is eligible if it is a community college or one of these five categories of federally recognized minority serving institutions: historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities, predominantly Black institutions, Native American serving non-tribal institutions, and Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian serving institutions. Applications are also eligible if they include such an institution as a subrecipient in the budget and a full partner in the collaboration. So if the applicant institution, that is the PD's home institution, is not eligible, but you are partnering with, say, scholars at an HBCU, and your application has that HBCU on the budget as a subawardee, then you can ask for the additional $50,000 of support. New this year, there's a new stipulation that the qualifying institution must receive an amount from the grant that is at least equal to the extra money requested. So if a project requests the whole extra $50,000 that's permitted, because they're partnering with an eligible institution, then at least $50,000 needs to go to that eligible institution. Please reach out to us if you have any questions about this extra 50,000 issue. Finally, there is a lot of flexibility in terms of how you can allocate this additional money. If you were doing, say, a 3-year project, you could have your first year budget include that money, or your last year could include it, or you could kind of break it all up and split that extra 50K into different amounts and spread it out over the 3 years. That would be up to you and where the project most needs the funds. Again, your institution is eligible for that extra funding if it is a community college or one of these 5 categories of federally recognized minority serving institutions. How do you know if your institution has been designated as one of these 5 categories? See pages 10 through 11 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity, which provides details about how you can find out about this and verify this. But basically, there are 2 ways you can be sure. You can check online at the U.S. Department of Education's website and see their most recent eligibility matrix. And here is the web address to find it. You can also establish your institution's status by obtaining a letter or other document from the U.S. Department of Education and include that letter in your application as part of the additional materials attachment. Keep in mind that institutional status for some of these categories shifts from year to year. So you do need to make sure you have that status at the time you apply, at the time you submit your application. This concludes the basic overview of the work the program supports through these 4 categories and some of our most recent changes to the program. I'm now going to pass the baton to my colleague, Madison Hendren, who is going to talk about the application process, what makes for a competitive application generally, and how to avoid some common pitfalls. Madison?
Thanks, Judy. All right, so as Judy said, we're going to change gears a little bit and talk about some tips for getting started and preparing your application. I like to start by giving you a sense of the timeline of your application from submission to notification so that you can go ahead and plan ahead. The federal grant process is long. The review process takes about 9 months for collaborative research applications. As you see here, and as mentioned by Judy, applications are due on November 20th, 2024. Peer review panels will meet in March and April of 2025. The National Council on the Humanities will review funding recommendations, which are based on that peer review stage in July of 2025, and the chair of the endowment will make final funding decisions shortly thereafter. And then in August, notifications will be sent to applicants. The earliest start date, again, for projects submitting to the November 2024 deadline is October 1st, 2025, and the latest start date is September 1st, 2026. So your project start date can fall anywhere in between that year. Another thing to take away from this slide is that multiple folks at each stage will be able to read your application. So again, it's important that your application speaks equally well to specialists in your field and to generalists who might not be as familiar with your field. All right, so where to start? You've already heard Judy mention several times our Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO. Each NEH grant program has its own NOFO, which is essentially the blueprint or guidelines for everything about the program, what the program supports and what it does not support, how to apply, how to structure and format the different components of the application, what the review criteria are for the program, and more. The current collaborative research NOFO is available on the program page of the NEH website, and to find it, you'll just click on where it says Application Instructions. I can't emphasize enough the importance of reading the entire NOFO carefully. really from start to finish before you decide to apply, and then consulting it continually while you're writing and assembling the different parts of the application. This is particularly important for this program because there are our 4 different categories, and different parts of the NOFO break out those different categories and ask you to supply different kinds of information depending on which category you're applying for. It's admittedly dry reading, but successful applicants are usually people who read and follow the NOFO. And here are some points on the slide that warrant particular attention. So the purpose section, that's section A1 in the NOFO, will break down those categories again so you can decide which is the best match for your project and the stage you're at of that project. Judy already mentioned our funding restrictions. You can see that in section D6. There's also section H, which is important. It has related funding opportunities. So as Judy mentioned, some of those funding restrictions are things that NEH can support, but in different programs. And so you'll want to look through those and make sure that the collaborative research program is the right program that most closely aligns with the needs and goals of your project. Projects tend to do well when they are submitted to a program that supports the kind of work that needs to be done and those project goals. So really important to make sure you're applying to the correct program. Section C3 will help you select your project team. And finally, well, not finally, but section D2 is the content and form of application that goes over what should be included in your application. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then finally, the review criteria on section E1. Those are the criteria that we will give to reviewers. Those are the criteria that they will use to evaluate your application. So you want to take a good look at those and make sure your application addresses them. Other things to do now, if you're considering applying, is to partner with your research development office. They will help you assemble some parts of the application, including the budget. They will also help with the submission process and issues related to institutional policies and federal compliance. They're a really good resource, and it's definitely worth getting in touch with them early on. Under the application instructions section on the Collaborative Research Program page, you'll find sample application narratives. I encourage you to take a look at them and use them to give you a sense of how past successful applicants have made the case for their project and its significance. But please note that all those applications were responding to a different set of NOFO guidelines, and some were applying when we still allowed bundled projects. So before we had the 4 categories that we have now. The sample narratives up on the website are still useful, and we've slotted them under headings for the 4 categories where we think they fit best. But do keep in mind that they were submitted under different NOFOs. And remember also that the samples may be a source of inspiration, but what worked for one project might not work for another. Okay, I mentioned we're going to talk more about that section of the NOFO, the content and form of the application. You'll want to return to this section often as you prepare your application, and being aware of and understanding the requirements for the category you are applying to is very important. So I just want to spend a minute going over some of the terms you will see in the NOFO. Your application will consist of several components. Some will be forms you or your institutional grant administrator fill out on grants.gov, and others will be attachments, so files attached as PDFs. This includes your narrative, your bibliography, work plan, resumes, and other files. All application components are listed either as required, conditionally required, or recommended. NEH will not review applications that are missing required or relevant conditionally required components. Applications missing components listed in the NOFO as recommended will still be reviewed, but we strongly encourage you to include these components to make the strongest case for your project. You will also see a distinction between mandatory and suggested page limits for individual components. And again, I want to highlight that the page limit for the narrative component has been reduced from 11 pages down to 10 pages for this year. So do be aware of that. NEH will not review an application that includes a component that exceeds a mandatory page limit. This is very rigid and we cannot make exceptions. Suggested page limits are more flexible in that pages in excess of the suggested limit will not render your application non-responsive or ineligible. Nevertheless, we strongly encourage you to stay within the requested parameters. As you assemble your application, be sure to refer back to the requirements in the NOFO to ensure you include all required components and make sure your attachments comply with the page limits before you submit your application. I also want to spend a little time talking about the additional materials attachment. So this is attachment 6 in the application because we often receive questions about this attachment. Additional materials are recommended in the sense that I just spoke about. Your application won't be disqualified without them, but a strong proposal will include them. We strongly encourage that you include the supplementary materials listed in the NOFO on pages 18 and 19. Some materials are recommended across the 4 project categories, such as explanatory graphics or permission letters when relevant. But in addition to those general items, each project category has different recommended additional materials. So for example, for scholarly digital projects, wireframes or sitemaps are recommended, and for conferences, a draft program is recommended. Just to give 2 examples, again, you can see that full list on pages 18 and 19 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. So make sure to include the additional materials as relevant to your project and project category. However, we ask that you not include anything not specified in the NOFO in your additional materials. Again, recommended here means that they are not required for your application to proceed through the review. It should not be understood as an invitation to include other types of materials not recommended in the NOFO, such as writing samples, reader reports, or letters of recommendation. While we do encourage you to include letters of support from important archives, partners, and tribal or community populations you might be working with, these are intended to demonstrate consent or agreement on the part of those entities to participate in the project or allow access to materials. They should not be letters of recommendation for the proposed project. Please also know that there is a mandatory page limit on this attachment of 10 pages. Including more than 10 pages of additional materials will result in your application being disqualified. So in sum, include the materials listed in the NOFO and only those materials, and stay at or under 10 pages for attachment 6. Again, we receive many questions about international collaboration, so I want to talk about that. Non-US based collaborators are allowed, and as Judy mentioned, at least one is required in the planning international collaboration category. International collaborators are not required, but are certainly welcome in the other 3 categories. Collaborative research budgets can ask for support for non-US based collaborators, but no funds can go to a non-US institution. So non-US based collaborators whether they're affiliated with a foreign institution or independent scholars located abroad, are typically paid individually as consultants. NEH is a U.S. federal agency, and any collaboration proposed must significantly involve U.S. scholars. So a section of the NOFO mentions that the U.S. applicant institution cannot essentially be a pass-through entity, but must contribute significantly to the project. So if you had, say, one U.S. scholar and otherwise all non-U.S. scholars, and the budget had most of the funds going to these non-U.S. scholars, that might raise some red flags, and you'd really want to emphasize the contributions of that U.S. scholar. Okay, so here's some advice for creating a competitive application kind of overall across all 4 project categories. First, we are still seeing some bundled projects because the program used to allow for that. But now you must apply for one and only one category. The second bullet item here is making a similar point. The program is geared towards well-conceived, well-structured, feasible projects rather than sort of a sprawling, undefined research agenda. As Judy mentioned, there is a section of the application narrative called the history of the project. And this is a good place to describe not only how the project and the collaboration has evolved to the point it's at now at the time of application, but also your larger agenda going forward, which might include additional components outside the scope of the grant period. Remember, though, that panelists are asked to evaluate the specific proposed project for your individual category, and that should be the focus of your narrative. And the work plan and budget should all serve that immediate project. Next, I want to underscore again that this program calls for original research and the pursuit of significant research questions, and your application should reflect that. It's important to articulate the questions at the heart of the project and communicate how pursuing those questions will drive humanities fields or a specific field forward. Related to that point, intellectual significance is always the first among equals in the review criteria for grant programs in the Division of Research. So you really need to make the case and show or explain to the panelists how your work is going to make a significant contribution. Outline the scholarly debates or conversation your project engages with, and how your research and conclusions are going to move them forward or add an important new perspective. Again, competitive proposals tend to get the peer review panelists excited about the intellectual possibilities of the collaboration itself. You want to convince the panelists that something is going to happen intellectually with these people working together that wouldn't otherwise happen. Successful teams also give careful thought to how intellectual exchange or collaborative synergy is going to be generated. Applications tend to do better if they show some sort of intentionality about the structure of the work process and how that structure is designed to lead to cross-fertilization of ideas or real synergy of skill sets. Next, don't shortchange the work plan. Give panelists confidence that you have a well thought out plan to get the work done. The plan should not come across as vague or a kind of trust me sort of plan. Next, you want to write clearly, avoid jargon, and again, write for those outside your field. You will likely have scholars in your discipline and scholars outside your immediate discipline on the panel that reviews your application. So keep that in mind along with that extended review chain I showed you earlier. You need to write for both the inside reader, the person inside your field, and the outside reader. I encourage you to share your application narrative with someone outside your discipline who is unfamiliar with the project and ask them what they don't understand, or where they might become confused. It's a good way to kind of approximate that peer review panel that your application is going to go through. Beyond listing the required components in the notice of funding opportunity, we offer suggestions for organizing your narrative, and I do recommend adhering to them. It helps ensure you address the criteria, and reviewers find it easier to locate the information they need to evaluate the project when the application follows the structure outlined in the NOFO. Finally, submit a draft. This year's draft deadline is Wednesday, September 18th, 2024. Speaking of those drafts, let me tell you a little bit more about the draft process in this program. Drafts are optional, not required, but other applicants have found it helpful to submit a draft for feedback. If you wish to submit a draft, you must use the draft template available under Program Resources on the Collaborative Research Program page of the NEH website. Here you see a glimpse of that template. You can download it as a Word document and then copy and paste in text or type directly in it. You'll choose only one project category, and we ask that you please respect the word limits. In some ways, draft is a bit of a misnomer in this program in that the template really offers more of a snapshot of your project. It's not a full draft narrative, but that usually provides enough information for staff to comment on the fit of your project to a particular category or to the program as a whole, and to highlight any issues they see, and to offer some helpful feedback for framing your project in the application. It also prompts you to get started and zero in on the essentials of your project. There's also a place in the template for you to pose specific questions you have for staff, and we will respond to those with our feedback. We do only accept one draft per application, or one draft per project, but you can email your completed template to collaborative@neh.gov with collaborative research draft in the subject line of your message. Again, no later than September 18th. To wrap things up, we will go over some of the more technical errors that we commonly see so that you can try to avoid them. Although these are technical issues, they are not mere technicalities. Inattention to some of these details can result in your application being disqualified or being offered a reduced award amount. I mentioned the eligibility requirements earlier. So in this program, degree candidates cannot be project directors, co-project directors, or the sole collaborator on a two-person team. However, degree candidates can occupy other roles on the team. We've already talked about the page limits, but I will note that sometimes when you convert a Word document and turn it into a PDF, the text can slip onto an additional page. And unfortunately, that can cause an application to be disqualified for exceeding those mandatory page limits. So check your PDFs before submitting them to make sure, again, that they are within the page limits set out in the NOFO. Again, be mindful of those funding restrictions. We know these applications can take a lot of time to put together. And again, if you have any questions about whether your project might fall into one of those restricted categories, it's better to send us an email and make sure your project is eligible rather than submit an application for a project that is ineligible in this program. The last two things on this slide won't impact the review of your application or eligibility, but could result in a delay in processing your award should your application be successful. And furthermore, using an incorrect indirect cost rate can also result in a reduced award amount. So something to be aware of and bring up with your grant administrator. This concludes our pre-application webinar. We hope this overview has given you some insight into the program and how to go about creating a competitive application. Just to reiterate what Judy said at the beginning, there is an additional opportunity to learn more about the Collaborative Research Program. We will be holding a live Q&A on Thursday, September 5th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. You can find the link to register for that Q&A session on the Collaborative Research Program page on NEH's website. You can just Google Collaborative Research NEH and you'll find it. And you can see also the URL for our program page up on the slide. If you can't make it to the Q&A, that's no problem. We will also post it on the program page. We'll post a recording on the program page after the fact so you can learn from other folks' questions. You can also email us, email any one of us if you have further questions. Our email addresses are here on the slide. Or you can email the general collaborative inbox, which is collaborative@neh.gov, and one of us will get back to you. Feel free to email me if you have any comments or suggestions about either the program or future webinars. We always appreciate feedback and would love to hear from you. On behalf of NEH and my colleagues, Judy and Amy, thank you for attending this webinar, and thank you for your interest in the Collaborative Research Program. We hope to see many of you apply this year or in future years, and we wish you all the best with your scholarly endeavors.